I'm honored to introduce this first panel. It's called Transforming Obesity Care in the United States. In 2013, the American Medical Association declared obesity a disease, yet it's taken a decade or more for us to start seeing a societal shift in which people who are living with disease are taken seriously and not just treated as someone with a moral failing that caused their weight gain. Decades ago, a global healthcare company called Novo Nordisk took a stand that obesity is a misunderstood disease, not a personal failing. It's a matter of health. As a result of the power of science and the passion that it brings to everything it does, particularly when it comes to driving meaningful change, Novo Nordisk has helped pave the way for better care for people living with obesity. We all have heard untold stories about lives transformed by the weight loss that this drug has caused. It's really amazing. And we're really lucky because members of the team that drove those results are here with us today to give us an inside look at how they did it and how it affected their company. So please welcome to the stage Tejal Vishalpura, Senior Vice President of Commercial Strategy and Marketing at Novo Nordisk.
Good morning, everyone. It is an absolute honor to be here with you all on this very rainy New York City morning. So thanks for making the trudge over here, wherever you came from. I am so excited to represent more than 55,000 of my fellow teammates across Novo Nordisk, from our R&D labs to our manufacturing lines, to our home offices and field teams all around the world. It was them that made and transformed obesity care into the zeitgeist that you all and we all see and hear today. Now, the theme of our time together is transform. And as I reflected on that, to transform truly goes beyond just changing or evolving. It's creating a profound shift in the very essence of something towards a new state. And whether it be a personal shift, a shift in an industry, or in this case, a paradigm shift in human health, to transform takes courage, takes determination, and it also takes, in this case, an unrelenting spirit to embrace the unknown. And we will be very open with you about the unknowns and the learnings we had along the way. We are so proud to have created a real inflection in society when it comes to obesity and health. And for all of us at Novo Nordisk, it hasn't been overnight. It's been more than 20 years in the making. And it's taken pioneering leadership to challenge status quo. Now, we're at a marketing conference, and so it's really important. We're not going to talk about the creative or the marketing buzzwords or trends that went into the transformation. What we're going to talk about is what actually drove the transformation for the last couple of decades, and that's what we call our Novo Nordisk way. It's our ethos as a company, it's embedded in our DNA, and it guides everything that we do from who we are to where we go, how we treat each other, and it's our ethics and our values. So, all of the things about the Novo Nordisk way are embedded in the heart of it all as patient centricity. Every decision that we make is guided in what's best for the patients today and for the long term. And that starts with deep empathy, open listening, and a deep understanding of people living with obesity. And so let's start with empathy.
The biggest misconception of being a bigger person is that it's my choice.
You see it all the time, eat less, move more, and I do eat less, I do move more, and it's so damaging to my mental health.
Así tú intentes bajar, tu organismo va a hacer todo por regresarte a ese peso. we all react differently to calories because we're all different.
我觉得让大众认识肥胖症是有帮助的。
Growing up, my mum was always blamed by doctors. She's carried that blame and guilt for years. I'm trying my hardest and I can't lose weight. You know, obesity is a disease.
After trying all the diets, all the exercises, it still feels like an uphill battle. Now I want to just be healthy.
Mi salud me preocupa porque quiero ser mamá mucho tiempo.
我是为了我自己，因为我觉得说，为了我自己减肥，就是为了我健康啊，然后还有我的心情。
Sí se puede, pero a veces solamente se logra con apoyo de los demás.
We need to talk about this issue so it will be destigmatized.
It might seem a struggle, but we will get there and we will succeed.
It's these voices and these stories that we carry with us every single day to help power through the change that we're driving. Now, it was more than 20 years ago that Novo Nordisk took a stand before obesity was talked about. We took a stand to say obesity is a serious chronic disease with a biological root cause, and it's not a personal moral failing. Doctors didn't know how to treat it at the time because they weren't adequately trained on it. And it's a disease where everyday Americans living with it were misunderstood, faced shame and blame every single day for years, often over a lifetime. They were told by so many people that this was their fault, including from their own doctors. And while at the same time, they, like all of us, grapple with how to love themselves and the body that they're in. Now, there's not one person in this room who can't think right now of a loved one or someone they care about who hasn't grappled with the same struggle. It's very real and it's everywhere. Since 1990, obesity rates have more than tripled, fueling an epidemic. Now, when 1 in 3 American adults live with obesity, how is it possible in today's society with the healthcare system that we have that we struggle so much as a society on how to care for them? 1 in 3. Just pause and just look to your left and look to your right. 1 in 3. And the reality is that obesity is a disease, and it's not because Novo Nordisk said so. Research and science has proven it to be so over and over again. And the AMA finally declared obesity to be a disease more than a decade ago. And even now, with modern medicine and increased mainstream media attention, Americans still face barriers in acceptance of their disease, in care and access to the treatment that they deserve. Only 1 in 10 seek help because of this stigma. And even when they do bust out of that shame that they've owned over a lifetime and seek medical attention, they're still often told way too often to just eat less, exercise more, as if they hadn't thought to do that before or tried that before. So let's say any one of us in this room has high blood pressure, high cholesterol. Can you imagine just going to your annual physical and not having that even discussed? Or being told, just take in less salt. That's what these patients face every single day. And it's not just HCPs. Payers and employers also don't understand the disease and view insurance coverage as optional. There are more gaps in care and access and acceptance for these people than with those living with other diseases. So, how do we transform this? Now, we knew at Novo Nordisk tackling the epidemic of obesity was going to be more difficult in ways unlike any other chronic disease we have tackled or our industry has tackled. And we knew it wasn't going to happen overnight. Transforming obesity care required a long-term focus. It was something hard that needed to be done and required a lot of commitment over a long time. We spent more than 2 decades unlocking the science of obesity, identifying novel approaches and mechanisms for treatment, and invested in creating significant R&D partnerships. One of the things, so I'm 1 year new into Novo Nordisk, and one of the things that really attracted me coming into the organization was something that's actually very few people know about. We have a very unique ownership model that allows us to ask these big questions where we won't see impact for decades to come. We are uniquely owned by the Novo Nordisk Foundation. It is the world's largest nonprofit foundation whose mission it is to support scientific and humanitarian service to society over the long term. And this ownership structure uniquely allows all of us at Novo Nordisk to be both commercially successful and at the same time be responsive and responsible to the long-term needs of society for the next decades and centuries to come. We are uniquely set up to tackle the long, hard questions. We measure our impact by the number of patients we help. We measure our impact not on the whims of monthly and quarterly shareholder returns. We measure our impact on our footprint in society over decades and maybe even the next century. As pioneers of this transformation, we've brought deserved attention to the millions of people living with obesity so that it is today recognized as a disease, so that these people can get the care that they deserve. We've ignited a cultural conversation, collaborating with allies with a shared mission all over the world. And over the past decade, we've invested and supported in legislation and ways to remove barriers to obesity care, whether it's from diagnosis, treatment, access, et cetera. We've worked with insurance companies, employers, healthcare policymakers to broaden coverage. We've set the bar on scientific innovation and will continue to raise that bar on the science, the education, and the access that people living with obesity deserve. So today, obesity care is transforming. And just a few weeks ago, you all might have seen that Oprah held a primetime special where she brought to light obesity as a disease through the lens of her own personal struggle. This increased attention being placed on obesity today helps people living with this disease feel seen. Their stories and their struggles and their journey in life feel validated. And it's giving them the courage more than ever in the history of human health to seek care and advocate for their own health. Now, with the launch of Wegovy, almost immediately following the launch, we saw demand for Wegovy like nothing our industry or even our company has ever seen before. And we'll talk about what we've learned and what we faced. It's been incredible to see the conversation shifting with more and more people proactively seeking out care for their disease, advocating for their own health, having a voice. And as a company, we want that. We've worked for 2 decades for that. It's also for us as an organization illuminated new challenges and showed us the way of new roads that still need to be paved. And it's opened up new challenges that we've had to learn and work our way through. Things like ensuring that our supply matches the growing demand. The demand for Wegovy is outpacing how quickly we can make it. And what we've done is really double down on our investment in our manufacturing, running our manufacturing sites 24/7 and amplifying that because people deserve the medicine that they need. We also navigate challenges that we've never had to face before, more than any other company in our industry has, around companies seeking to profit from misinformation, offering counterfeits and compounded medicines that they claim to be the same as our FDA-approved medicines. And for us, because we think about the long term, that's a real patient safety risk, and so we don't sit quietly and silently on the sidelines for that. We've also worked to educate on the distinct indications of Wegovy, Ozempic, making sure that Ozempic is preserved for patients who live with type 2 diabetes. Every day we see our brands, our medicines, our company all over TikTok, and we've had to learn new muscles in terms of how do we make sure that there is a source of truth and accurate information grounded in science and research for people who are seeking treatment, but oftentimes clearing through that clutter of misinformation out there. Because we focus on the long term, we take the responsible use and accurate information and representation of our brands and our medicines very seriously. So, at Novo Nordisk, we have been pioneering and paving new roads that transform human health for actually the past 100 years, starting first with diabetes, now with obesity, and actually more yet to come. We do hard things, and we do hard things that matter for the long term, not seek short-term wins. So how do we know that our 20-year commitment and perseverance has been a real, genuine transformation? Today, more people are seeking care and advocating for their health. More medical school programs, nursing school programs, pharmacy school programs are training or looking for ways to train on obesity care and weight management so that the next generation of healthcare professionals can help more people. More people today have coverage and access to obesity medicines than ever before. CMS just recently announced they see value in covering Wegovy for CV benefits and benefits beyond the weight scale for their Medicare patients. More and more companies are joining this and researching more and more obesity medicines, and we welcome that. All of this means that today, more people than ever living with obesity are taking control of their health. It's what we fought for 20 years. Now, those roads we talked about paving over the past 20 years, more companies are also starting to drive on those roads or look for ways to build cars to drive on those roads. And we absolutely are excited about that. We didn't build them to be exclusive, just for us. It's going to take all of us. This is an epidemic. We're so proud at Novo Nordisk. We're helping more patients than ever before. With obesity, we have 1 million patients we're helping, but we know there's 100 million patients out there who still need help, and there's no one company that can do this alone. So it's going to take all of us, and so I invite you all to join us, learn with us, and let's continue to transform health for the long term together. So now, what I would love to do is invite two of my teammates, and we're actually going to do a panel to really talk to you about our learnings along the way with the Wegovy launch, and learnings that we would like to share more broadly. So I will invite Anna McCaughan, who actually is one of our MM+M Pinnacle Award winners. Anna leads our HCP marketing for obesity. Thank you. Also, I'd like to welcome Christine Szymanski. Christine actually has been on our obesity team for almost a decade now, so we talk about the long-term journey. She has a wealth of knowledge and understanding about this disease, and we'll share our learnings along the way. Christine leads our consumer marketing for Wegovy. And Marc, I believe you will be moderating us, so thank you.
Welcome to MM+M Transform. Just to echo Tejal's remarks, thanks for braving the weather out there. Beautiful spring day, right? So Tejal, thank you so much for telling that story. We're going to go a little bit of a level deeper now and explore a little bit more behind the HCP and patient marketing involving Wegovy. And to do that, Tejal is joined by a couple of her colleagues at Novo, and I'll introduce them now. To my immediate left is Anna McCaughan. Anna is currently the Senior Brand Director of the Obesity franchise at Novo Nordisk, where she leads the HCP strategy and market development team for inline and pipeline products, and she was instrumental in launching Wegovy. Welcome.
Hi.
Hey. And to Anna's immediate left is Christine Szymanski. Christine is consumer obesity lead, and she and her team oversee strategy, content, and experience to enhance and destigmatize obesity care. Welcome, everybody, to this panel. I'd like to start off just with a little bit of an anecdote. You know, I heard on good authority, actually, that the scientist at Novo who discovered Victoza, which is liraglutide, which is another GLP agonist, actually was frustrated. What was she frustrated by? That she reads every day that it looks like we've just now jumped onto obesity and just found that GLP-1s can help with this. So kind of the same thing you were saying, Tejal, that this is not a new road for Novo, but that's what it kind of appears to be, you know, from the external market. So I thought it'd be interesting to travel back and kind of start there. You know, it seems for all the world that this is an overnight success, but it's really not. So how did your Wegovy story actually start? Anna, you want to start us off with that?
Sure. I actually did not know about that, but I can imagine because it is actually a story of our lead scientist for over 20 years researching on GLP-1. So, yeah, so though today you can't open any type of social media, any newspaper without talking about obesity. But as Tejal was talking about, this really was a 20-year journey in the making. Today there's over 100 million people that are living with obesity. However, very few people have recognized it as a disease. Very often, a person living with obesity will come see their healthcare provider, and the healthcare provider will see the health consequences of that obesity, the comorbidities that that patient lives with, but won't actually see or want to talk about the obesity itself. And it is ironic because, as physicians will tell us, it is the first thing they see. When they see the patient, they see the obesity, but it's the very last thing they want to talk about. So there's a lot to that really we had to understand as Novo Nordisk. And as Tejal mentioned, and Steve as well, it wasn't until 2013 that obesity got recognized as a disease. But even that was not done without a ton of controversy. And a lot of physicians still saying, yeah, this is a behavioral disease, not a biological disease. So I've done plenty of market development in my career. I have educated on diseases and links between diseases. But this was the first time ever that I had to do something very different, and that was doing market development on bias and stigma. So really peeling back the layers of the onion and really figuring out where is this bias coming from, where is this stigma coming from, and then actually having to have real conversations with doctors and asking them to face those biases and stigmas. So I think that's something that a lot of people don't know about this journey, is that we had to use very different marketing muscles than any of us had ever tried before, because this wasn't just about it's a disease. It was about making sure physicians understood it was a disease that was worth treating and wasn't a disease of willpower. So that has taken like at least a decade just with that education before we launched Wegovy.
Sure, it's like turning the Titanic.
Yeah.
Christine.
If you really think about where
Or an
we
aircraft
started-
carrier, maybe not the Titanic.
If you really think about where we started with Saxenda, if you think back to 2014, this was our first GLP-1 for weight management, for chronic weight management, and we had just learned that obesity was declared a disease in the public's eye. And so you put those two things together, we have this efficacious drug, everybody now knows it's a disease, and you think, okay, this is it, this is going to be it. And boy, did we learn a lot of things after that launch. You know, we entered into the space as a medicine that treats obesity, a chronic disease. But what we quickly realized is that this is an acute weight loss market. People are very focused on dropping a few pounds and thinking that everything is okay after that. We also realized, as Anna was saying, there was bias and stigma, and not just with healthcare providers or decision makers, but with people themselves who are living with obesity. And there was a lot to unpack there. And if you think back to your own childhood, or even if you have children now, and think about cartoons. I'm sure everyone can think of a cartoon when they were a child that represented a young kid whose clothes didn't fit, who always seemed to be eating constantly, who was funnier than everybody else, deemed as lazy. And these cartoons, in most cases, don't actually say a word. It's the looks, it's the glances, it's the acceptance. And these are cues that we have been receiving as we grow up. And of course, as we grow up, more words are added and more glances are added. But these are the things that everybody's believes. So what we realize is these belief systems, these were really deep. And there was a lot of work to be done. So no, it wasn't overnight. We've been working and educating and unpacking this for years.
And a conference that I attended last year, the head of obesity medicine at Dartmouth said that actually doctors felt stigmatized as well. They were very defensive about obesity care. And he actually said, obesity is the only disease that you could talk about at a cocktail party, but not in the office. Mm-hmm. And so, it's, again, sort of the challenges that you as marketers are facing and having to kind of develop new muscle here to pave these new roads. Let's switch gears a little bit, travel back, if you would, to the launch phase of Wegovy. Christine was mentioning Saxenda, which obviously, of course, was the sort of liraglutide, just approved for obesity. And you said you learned a lot from that launch. So fast forward about almost a decade to Wegovy's launch, early 23, late 22. Can you describe what the market dynamic situation was at the time of launch, Christine, if you wouldn't mind?
2021. Does everybody remember what was going on in 21? So we were smack dab in the middle of a pandemic. As marketers, I think we can all appreciate that maybe that's not the best time to launch a new brand. But what was really interesting about what was going on with the pandemic is that there was a lot of news. Remember the headlines about people living with obesity and how they were having more severe cases of COVID? These news stories started to emerge. And that was right around the same time that our clinical data was starting to be published for Wegovy. And so there was a lot more conversation in the narrative, in the public's eye, in all of our phones and all the headlines that we were seeing. And I think internally, one of the things that we realized is, we had always had a heart for and really believed in what Wegovy could become. And I think those headlines told us, it looks like there are a lot of other people who are going to start feeling that way as well. So I think the big thing for us was this launch is going to be quite different than the last launch. And so we were pretty excited about that at the time.
Yeah, and Christine talks about just the excitement. The team had seen a lot of signals when the data read out. There was a lot of excitement, a lot of storyline, but man, when it launched, as an organization, and actually even as an industry, we can't think of another brand that got this much press, communications, attention. And that for us meant we needed to build a muscle where where our communications team became central, integral to everything about this launch. How the conversation was going way bigger and beyond what ourselves and our own message and how it was being received out there. And our communications team was absolutely incredible and is absolutely incredible through all of that. But for us, it's, even when we think about what are some analogs, we think about like what Prozac did to the antidepressant market or Viagra. This is way beyond that in terms of the attention that got. And I think a lot of it is Wegovy unleashed and ignited a dynamic among people living with obesity, going from kind of the shadows to seeking and getting attention and visibility. I mean, that was incredibly exciting for all of us.
Right, so you had to, I'm sorry, Anna, do you want to say something?
No, I just wanted to say, I think one other thing when we talk, market dynamics, the one thing you can't overlook is the reimbursement landscape in 2021 for obesity medications. So I came to the obesity franchise at Novo Nordisk from diabetes. So I came from a world where about 80% of patients are treated and about 95% of them have access to their medication. And then I found myself in the obesity world. Only 2% of all people living with obesity back in 21 were even treated. A lot of it had to do with how the world viewed obesity as a disease, but an equal amount was how it was reimbursed. So I think something that's important is that when we launched, less than 30% of patients living with obesity had access. But it made it, and that it sounds like a lot, right? That's still 30 million people. Not too bad, not too shabby. However, the obesity market is different in terms of reimbursement. Because not only does your PBM have to cover the medication, now your employer has to actively opt in. The employer has to know that they have to opt in. And when that employer opts in, it's not something that's publicly available in terms of finding out who has coverage. So imagine a little bit of a needle in a haystack. That's how doctors would describe it. It's like, yes, I know there's some coverage out there, but I have no idea how to find it. And it's just too many hurdles that I have to jump through to make that happen. And what happens with that is that when you have low access and difficult to identify access, very quickly it becomes a history of no access. So very, very often we were met with physicians saying, it's just not worth it. I don't have the time and I don't have the staff. So I think you can't underestimate, in addition to how the world viewed obesity, how payers viewed it as well.
Sure. But even in spite of those, it's 30 million to 50 million. That's 20 million more people that have access, and that's incredible. In just a couple of years.
Made a big change.
It's really interesting to hear you break down the market that way, Anne. I mean, talk about usually changing physician behavior. There's a lot of inertia there to begin with, and this kind of just created an additional hurdle. And coverage reimbursement is really a benchmark. It's sort of a benchmark of legitimacy from a patient point of view. Having to cash pay, that probably only adds to the stigma as well of getting obesity treatment. So it really created, stack the deck, against you all as marketers.
No doubt.
Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the launch itself. Knowing the complexities of the market as they were, while also recognizing this unmet need for people living with this disease and the strong clinical profile of Wegovy, how did you approach the launch?
How long do you got, Marc? I can talk about this for days because this really was, again, it's been really fun for us, to be honest with you, Marc. I'm really happy that you invited us to do this.
I'm glad you get a chance to reflect, right? On
it's actually the first time that we really had to sit and reflect on the story and had to reflect on how different this was and the muscle that we all had to build and learn. So I'm sure for any marketers, so I'm an HCP marketer. So my number one tool, of course, when it comes to any kind of launches is targeting. Who do I target? How do I segment my HCPs so that we get the right message to the right people? While here, again, the obesity market is very different. There are actually only a very small handful of doctors that are obesity specialists. The majority of the patients that at the time when we launched were treated by obesity specialists was tiny. The majority of patients were treated and it was very difficult to predict who they were being treated by. It was anything from a pain management specialist, primary care, a psychiatrist, a cardiologist. But the other thing that we learned was it was almost impossible to predict which ones of these specialties were going to be interested in actually writing. So very quickly we found out that a trusted and true marketing tool, which is targeting, was not going to be the most important thing for us to do. So we realized that what we really had to do was develop a messaging platform that spans all these different specialties. And how do you do that? Like, how do you actually talk to an obesity specialist with the same message that you're talking to a pain management specialist or primary care? So we really quickly, well, not quickly, our agency of record, Concentric, is here with us today, and they know that we spent over 18 months honing in on this story and figuring out how we best span all these specialties. And one of the things that we found was to do a setup that was relevant to that particular doctor and the patient that they saw. And unfortunately, at the time, still focusing on those comorbidities that specialty was treating as a way in to talk about it. So I think that was like a massive learning for us and about how we did this. And really, yeah, it wasn't as much about segmentation anymore. It really was about messaging, and that became our number one kind of weapon.
I'll add a little from the consumer side of things. So Anna talked about the complexities of even finding people who are covered. It seems like such a big number, but nobody themselves knew who was covered, and the HCP certainly didn't know. So when we were thinking about how to do DTC and what our television spot should look like, everyone is familiar with the last line in just about every single TV spot, which is talk to your healthcare provider about insert your drug name. And we thought, if we send everybody in, very excited, finally having the courage to have this conversation, ask for a medicine, a large majority of them are going to be very disappointed because they don't have coverage, but they don't know that. So we took a different approach and we said, how can we really create the best conversations possible in the healthcare provider's office? Not just to support the healthcare provider, but obviously to support the patient themselves. And so at the end of our television commercials, it says, check your cost and coverage before talking to a healthcare provider. And this was a big deal. This was not something we had done before. We talked about it and we said, listen, we're trying to help patients and healthcare providers do what's best for the patient. So how can we enable that in meaningful ways? And so this was a big shift in how we operated and how we continue to roll.
I don't know if I've told you enough, Christine, about this, is how in awe I was at that time of that choice. I'm a healthcare marketer. My job is to drive demand and drive into doctors' offices and have those conversations with doctors. And for Christine to come and say, not so fast. We have to do what's right by the patient and actually ask them to check their coverage so that they won't go in disappointed. I thought that was so revolutionary, and I hope that I've mentioned it to you many times before, because that's really, I thought it was incredibly impressive that you took that stance.
We're good, Anna.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I told you before? Okay, good. She doesn't like it when you compliment her. But I think the elephant in the room then, of course, is, so if you took some of these steps not to drive crazy demand, how did demand then end up completely outstripping the supply that we had available? Like I said before, I came from diabetes. 80% of patients have care, 95% of them have access. And so not in my wildest dreams did I think that we were going to see what we were seeing, because I was used to a market that had a ton of coverage, a ton of understanding, and so I knew this was a very different market. But from day one, as Christine mentioned and Tejal mentioned in terms of the media, we started seeing an uptake curve that we had never even seen in diabetes. And Novo Nordisk has launched some very successful diabetes drugs over the years. And again, stressing, they had 95%
You have to admit,
coverage.
that first week was pretty good.
Oh, the first week was so fun. Like that first week, oh my God, we were looking at each other and we were like, ooh, did we actually break through? Is this going to be the tipping point where people understand it? And then the second week, we're like, yeah, this is going great. Third week is when we started talking and saying, that curve is going to have to, it's going to have to break at some point, right? And it just didn't. And I still remember realizing, wait a minute, this has taken on a life of its own when my 14-year-old daughter came running down the stairs going, Mom, you've made it. And I went, I made it? That's fantastic. How did I make it? She goes, Wegovy is on TikTok. I'm like, wow, okay, that's how I made it at my 14. But I realized when my 14-year-old was talking about it and looking at all these things on TikTok, something was going on. And again, that curve just did not break. So we were about to go into the second phase of our launch. We were about to roll out more resources, talk to even more patients and healthcare providers, and that's when the first reports started coming in that our healthcare providers were telling us they couldn't get Wegovy for their patients. And so that's kind of how the next chapter of the Wegovy story started, which was our chapter of patient demand outstripping supply.
And you've had to, all along, from that point forward, kind of balance that remarkable mainstream recognition and demand with, fulfilling it. So let's switch gears, talk a little bit about that patient demand problem that came up. Tejal, you want to walk us through what that was like and how you responded?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think we've ever in this industry talked about a patient demand problem. And I think the sense of it really wasn't a problem. Like when we looked back, when we think about the demand for Wegovy, we stepped back to say, wow, like it's unleashed and ignited how people living with obesity have felt just shamed and blamed and kind of felt like they were taken care of by a healthcare system. And with the launch of Wegovy, that hope ignited in them. And so when we think about the Wegovy demand, it's really sparking that cultural shift. That's the transformation, that cultural shift, and people saying, wow, I have hope. I feel validated. I can go and get care. And with that demand, the growth in that demand was so much higher and faster than our ability to produce the medicine itself. And we really stepped back as an organization to say, what do we do now? We just went all out in terms of doubling our investment in our manufacturing facilities. Clearly, there's a long lag time for that. We have incredible teammates working on our manufacturing lines. We've invested in thousands more employees working on our manufacturing lines. They run 24/7 so that we can keep pace with the growth of demand. And so it's not only producing so much more, but also as a marketing organization, we had to go back and saying, what do we do in this case, right? And as marketers, you're kind of wired to drive more demand and to, educate and drive more awareness. But because I go back to the Novo Nordisk ways that I talked about, that sense of doing the right thing because we're in this for the long term, right? And so we did have to step back to say, actually, we might need to dampen demand. And they'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. And so it wasn't a demand problem. It was igniting and sparking this and all the different ways that we've gone to increasing supply, but also navigate the ability to make sure that patients who have already started on our medicines, that they can continue on our medicines. And we really took some values-based, patient-centric approaches to dampening some of that initial demand and dampening new patient starts, which I can't think of any other case in our industry where we've had to say, please don't start new patients. We want to protect the ones who are already on treatment.
Sounds counterintuitive, right?
I would add to that and say, some of the things that I think about that happened early on that I think really crystallized how we operated. First was around transparency. I think it was really important for all of us that we were as transparent as possible. We knew that a lot of people were counting on us, those that have started our medicines and those that wanted to start our medicines. So whether we had good news, bad news, no news, we communicated as often and as quickly as possible and as completely as possible. And in order to do that, we really needed agility as an organization. I don't know about you, but we don't have a department for product supply challenges set up organically in our company. So we had to mobilize a number of important people across the company and figure out, who are the stakeholders that have the information that we need? What information do we actually need? How are we going to put together a communication to tell the story and to be as upfront as possible? How often do these people need to meet? What do we need to communicate? What is the way that we should communicate? How directly, how frequently? And so there was a lot of work that went on to make sure that we were mobilizing the right people, gathering the right information, and communicating as often as possible.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, I think a couple of principles that we really operated on, like to go with the transparency as well, really was trust. And trust both internally and externally, because as Christine said, we didn't have a department that knew how to handle this. We were writing the playbook, and we had to trust each other that we were all going to be in it. We were going to find those solutions together. So there was a lot of internal trust in how we were going to get this done. But then also, as an HCP marketer, for me, the worst thing that can happen is if you lose trust for your healthcare providers. And there's no doubt about the fact that we lost some trust with our customers. They had been waiting for this. They had patients coming in. There were doctors setting up office hours on Saturdays just to deal with the demand of patients coming in asking for this. And then we couldn't deliver. So I think, as Christine said, what was so important for us was that we were shoulder to shoulder with our healthcare providers and showed them, even as Christine mentions, on days where there were no news to communicate about this, that we still were out in front and still talking to them and directing them to where they could get help for their patients. So I think that trust was really important. And then the other thing was motivation. So healthcare providers, of course, is one of my number one stakeholders. But my other big stakeholder is the field force, the people who are out there selling Wegovy every single day. And as Tejal mentioned, just like marketers, we are driven to drive demand. A sales representative is fueled by a launch. It's the best thing. If any of you are salespeople out there, I have a short stint in sales myself. Launches is what you live for, right? And so now you're out there, you're seeing all this. Like our sales representative used to have to beg doctors to see them to talk obesity. All of a sudden, their cell phones were ringing off the hook. They had to tell doctors, I'll get to you when I get to you because I am only one person. It was literally the most wonderful thing for a sales rep to go out there and finally get to educate on obesity for people who want to listen, and then being met with not so fast. And I think one of the things we tried in the beginning was we tried to tell our reps, please go out and tell healthcare providers not to write. I don't know if you can imagine what that's like as a sales representative to have to do that. That's not exactly what you're motivated by. But in addition to that, there was a lot of complexities with it, right? Because there were some doctors saying, yeah, we understand that. But then the doctor down the road did not. And now it became a hunger game of who actually writes and who doesn't write. And that's livelihood for physicians as well. So as Tejal mentioned, we had to make the actual decision to pull the 3 lower doses from the market in order to force a stop of new prescriptions so that we can keep the patients on that had already started. So I think motivating our sales force, like figuring out things like how do you incentivize a sales representative that cannot be incentivized on scripts? None of us had ever tried to do that before. We really had to think outside the box and think outside our industry in terms of how we did that. But we were very open and honest, very transparent with our representatives. And one of the things that we did was we tried to literally try to put ourselves in their shoes. And I do remember the day where I had to stand in front of an entire sales force and say, I get it. I get it if you want to stand in front of a doctor that's angry and that's actually shouting at you. Throw your hands in the air and say, I'm also frustrated. I didn't create this problem. I'm equally frustrated. But then at the same time, have to motivate and convince the sales force, that was not going to help anybody. How is that going to help a provider? But instead lean in and say, here's the information that I have, here's how I'm going to help, here's how I can direct your patients to something. And I think our representatives leaning into that, I definitely hear today from our healthcare providers that has created an incredible trust between our sales reps and our providers. So if I had to rewrite the playbook again, I would do exactly the same thing when it comes to that.
It must have gone against every fiber of a salesperson's being to have to say, please don't write. So
I don't think any of them had ever been in that situation before, so yeah.
And the current campaign that's in the market, I believe, is kind of speaks to HCPs and consumers alike, the Believe On campaign, and you put access information front and center there. You bought the CDMO, which is a big move, obviously, the Catalent, kind of a move to restore supply and restore trust. Tejal, were there any other challenges other than supply that you kind of had to grapple with?
Yeah, and I alluded to some of those. Even to your 14-year-old daughter on TikTok, the representation and information about our brands, our medicines, obesity care is all over social media. And it's because people have a hunger to want to talk about it and to get information. Now, when you think about everyday Americans seeking information, it's how do we as an organization make sure that they're getting truthful, accurate, factual information about medicines in a world where it's sad but true that a lot of companies started popping up promising like counterfeits and compounding and misrepresenting themselves as our FDA-approved medicines. And that was a really big challenge for us because it was patient safety, right? And so it's not the same as going off on the streets of New York buying a fake Gucci bag. Like, it's something people were putting in their bodies. And we couldn't blame the people because they don't know when these things are marketed as semaglutide, and they don't know that what they're putting in their body isn't what's FDA approved. And so for us, that misinformation, making sure there's transparency and trust, and that people have a way to get factual information about their medicine is important. We did quite a bit to really connect with the counterfeits, actually including suing some of the companies that were the biggest perpetrators of it.
If I can add on, so from a patient safety perspective, given how important, and this is our number one priority, we actually pulled together a group of folks, built a website called semaglutide.com, and put all of the information on there about, for patients, they don't know exactly what they're getting. Their healthcare provider prescribes it, they take it home, they take a dose, but they don't exactly know, how do I know the difference between a compounded and a not compounded? How do I know the difference between counterfeit and a Novo Nordisk brand? So we put together information, we made it publicly available, we promoted it actively in all of the appropriate communications, but these are the types of things that you never would really think about need to be done. And it's a resource that we continue to optimize because every day there's something else that sort of pops up. So part of our thinking needs to be much more nimble so that we can adjust and continue to evolve and respond to the situations that come up.
Absolutely. One last question, and we'll stick with you on this one, Christine. The emergence of evidence that Wegovy reduces patients' risk of cardiovascular events, as we know, led to a label expansion by the Food and Drug Administration for treating patients with heart disease, as well as an endorsement by Medicare plans to cover the drug for cardiovascular risk reduction. What stands out most when you think about the societal impact, the public health impact that's possible with Wegovy?
Yeah. I think what's most impactful for me is that Wegovy served as the tipping point to open up these conversations in ways that they should be opened up, frankly. The conversations, as Tejal mentioned, with Oprah, you can feel the release of the stigma in newer conversations that are allowing people to just be and to seek the health care that they want and deserve.
As Opa mentioned, she kind of lamented the fact that these drugs have been out for 20 years. Why have I not heard of these before? So that really I think speaks to the efficacy. These drugs had not middling efficacy, not as efficacious as the most recent ones, and also the medical establishment and other factors. So it's interesting to see that the wheel is turning for them.
Yeah, and it is in a lot of different ways. Like, to piggyback off what Christine said, I was actually really happy when you gave us this question, because it did give us an opportunity to reflect on the fact that, yes, there has actually been societal change in the last 4 years because of this. And I think I have, for me, seeing how the narrative is changing. Like, in the beginning, even when Wegovy launched, it was all about weight loss, weight loss, weight loss. It was seen just as that one single component of obesity, but there's so much more to obesity. And now seeing two major things for me, that the conversation is changing just from weight loss to health, and what it means for people's health when they get treated for obesity is incredible. And then the second thing is that the tone has shifted. Even when we launched, when all the media storms hit, it was still a derogative tone very often when talked about obesity and these medications to treat it, right? And so that, to me, was a really big thing. But I think you touched on it. There was that moment when you realize we have really, truly created societal change, and that was a couple of weeks ago. As you mentioned, Marc, Wegovy has just increased its label now with a indication for the reduction of major adverse cardiovascular event for people living with obesity and cardiovascular disease, which in itself is incredible. But seeing how quickly that actually had a ripple effect. And within days of that label update, CMS coming out and talking about coverage. And I don't know if you guys know this, but since Medicare Part D was established in 2006, obesity medications have been barred. It is literally in writing in law. You cannot, on Medicare Part D, cover obesity medication. And to see how fast, after the SELECT study came out, that CMS came in and said, actually, not so fast. Now, if you do have such an indication, in addition to obesity as well, we will actually open up for coverage. That was the moment, I think, all of us at Novo Nordisk looked at each other for a second and went, we've been part of a true societal change. Again, the work has only just started. Because, for example, Part D still doesn't cover anti-obesity medications for people with just obesity. So there's still so much work to be done. But yeah, that was the moment for me where I went, oh my God, this is bigger than I ever thought it was going to be.
I think you can clearly feel that from Anna's energy right here. Honestly, the societal impact for us is in the long term, right? And like I said, I think there's this misperception that, the people at Novo Nordisk must be dancing in the halls and celebrating every single day. And actually, we even hadn't stopped to even reflect on our journey, because we are so heads down every single day because we know we have so much more work to do. We're facing new challenges that we never even expected. But there's 1 million people we're helping, and we're so proud of that. But there's 100 million more that still need our help, all of our helps. And that's where you heard words, and I feel like if you take nothing away, take away the fact that when we face these challenges as an organization, we talk about trust in the long term. How do we preserve that trust with our patients, within our own organization, with our customers and HCPs? And how do we not just go for what's right and the best thing for us in the short term for the month or quarter and the shareholder returns? It really is that we came into this to treat and transform obesity care more than 2 decades ago, and we're in this to transform it for the long term. And we do it with integrity, and that's where the Novo Nordisk way really guides. Anytime we pose and face a new challenge, that's what really we step back to say, what's the right thing to do for the long term? And I think having that be kind of our internal guide and barometer changes everything in the way that we face these challenges as an organization.
That's a great segue to our next talk, actually, Tejal. So thank you so much for this deeper look, and the next panel is going to explore more about what these changes mean for the broader coverage in the payer market. So thank you once again. It was really a joy.
Thank you.